Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Diablo Digest, the show where I take tidbits of information about Diablo 3, throw in a little bit of analysis, speculation, and some of my own opinion, and give it back to you in hopes that it might spark up some conversation or get you up to speed on what's going on with the development of Diablo 3. So today is the 26th of September in the year 2013, and I have pretty much just finished going through all the information about Reaper of Souls, because I was a little bit behind on that one. And, well, just as I finished kind of putting everything together, I haven't even taken the time to organize it so that I can talk about it yet. Blizzard releases kind of a new bit of information today, inadvertently releases, because they've got another PTR version that goes out, and Diablo fans has once again pulled a whole bunch of information out on that one. So I'm not quite ready to talk about Reaper of Souls as a whole just yet. When I do, it's going to pretty much be old hat, but again, I'll be throwing in opinion analysis and things like that, so who knows, maybe you'll still want to watch it. But what I figure I'll do today is talk about Paragon 2.0. So a lot of new information, or at least a lot of condensed information has been released by Blizzard regarding Paragon 2.0, so that we have a general idea of how this thing is going to work. It's kind of interesting, really. They're going from this individual character Paragon thing. So basically, you think Paragon, the original, was added to Diablo 3 as kind of this, to make up for the fact that you don't have 99 levels like you did in Diablo 2, I suppose. Because, you know, in Diablo 2, it took forever to get to 99. A lot of people didn't. Some did. Some people figured out how to do it in, you know, crazy amounts of time. And so Paragon was almost the same thing. So we had this level cap of 60, but it kind of ended there. So they added Paragon. Now you've got something to fight for after you hit the supposed cap, and you got 100 levels of Paragon. So now what they're going to do is kind of make it this reward system. Because what they found with Paragon is that once you invest a certain amount of time into a character, you get Paragon. You're getting all of this magic find, gold find, and your character is evolving, and it really feels like people will now then want to spend more time with that character because they've invested time into it. You know, until they hit that 100, then they might move on to something else. But even then, some might not. So they kind of want to make it more of a reward rather than feeling like you have to play that character now that you've gotten a Paragon on him. So we're going to take Paragon, put it across your account now. So all of your characters will benefit from your Paragon levels. This is going to transfer over from the current version, but a few changes are going to be made, of course. They've announced that there's going to be no level cap to Paragon now. So you can get as many Paragon levels as you want, as long as you're willing to put in the time. They haven't announced any kind of experience curve that's going to happen on this. And they have let us know that they're going to split it between hardcore and normal. So you can't farm a whole bunch of Paragon level on a normal character and start giving things to your hardcore characters. They're going to be separate on their own. Now they're making it so that these Paragon points you get for your account can be added to specific characters. So to facilitate that, they are removing the innate bonuses from the Paragon level. So if you recall, when Paragon was first announced, they were treated like regular levels for your character. So when you level up under the Paragon system currently, you gain 3 of a primary stat, 2 vitality, and 1 of everything else, right? So your character is still growing, getting stats. That's going to be removed, and instead, there's going to be 4 categories that you can put points into, and they're going to alternate as you level. There's going to be the core stats, so your strength, vitality, dex, yada yada. There's going to be offensive, defensive, and what they're calling adventure, although this has also been known as utility, from what we've seen on some screenshots. So some examples of what you're going to get here. All right, so let's look at what they've mentioned here for, say, offensive stats. That's going to be things like critical chance, crit damage, attack speed, even cooldown reduction. Defense will be health, resist all, armor, and dodge. And so far, the only things I found under adventure were run speed and gold pickup radius. There could be more. That's just all I have on me at the moment to really talk about. So the way this works is you can't put your skill points anywhere you want right away. The very first time you get a Paragon level, you're going to put it into a core stat. Then every level after that rotates through the categories. you'll have the second level be an offensive stat, the third will be defensive, the fourth will be adventure. You will continue to repeat this until you've capped out on all of the secondary stats. So what will happen is there's going to be this, there's not going to be a limit to Paragon itself, but there's going to be a limit to the secondary stats you can get in offensive, defensive, and adventure. And what they've said is that it'll take about Paragon level 800 before you cap all of those out. That pretty much equates to about 200 points in each section. Once you've capped out those, then everything else will go into core stats. So your core stats will continue to grow for as long as you decide to go into Paragon Levels. Now, if I take what we've been given here and some of the information that's been data mined, and I apply this new cap, and let's assume there's about 4 different subcategories. So offense, defense, and adventure all have 4 different subcategories. You can basically put that down to about 50 points as a cap for each individual stat. So offense itself will have 200 points total. Critical chance, for example, will have a 50-point cap. So the information we currently have shows that crit chance is given at about 0.2% per level. Crit damage is 1% additional damage per level. Attack speed is 0.2% attack speed, and cooldown reduction is 0.2% cooldown reduction. Now, you listen to those, and those really don't sound like a lot. And this is going to lead into a conversation I'm going to have about core stats here once we're done talking about Paragon. I think this is the only way they could have really done it fairly. I mean, they could say that, hey, we're going to make you more powerful, but they had to kind of make the rewards a little bit smaller, because when you start getting higher and higher Paragon level, and right now there are quite a few people that have high amounts of Paragon level. I mean, probably not a huge percentage of the population, but there are people out there with a lot of Paragon characters. And you're going to see that these stats will start to build up. So when we take the 50-point cap, what you're really seeing is you're going to get a maximum of 10% critical chance, 50% additional critical damage, 10% attack speed, 10% cooldown reduction. On the defense side, we're looking around a cap of about 25% additional health, which actually isn't bad. Resist all getting up to 250. Armor getting up to 25. That really doesn't sound like a lot. And dodge being about 10% additional dodge. Okay, the run speed looks to go up to about 25% additional run speed, and there's a golden pickup radius going up to about 50. Alright, so not a lot really, but there's something more important that was released today, and I'm kind of glad that this did come out while I'm recording this, is that in the new data mined information that just got released by Diablo fans, it looks like they've got some strings that show there's going to be caps on stats now that you can get with items. So they are going to make it so you can't make that 100% crit chance build with items. It looks like right now what we're seeing is about a 40% crit chance maximum with items. Now, I don't know if that counts towards gems. Like, for example, critical hit damage. Looks like it's going to max out at 250% additional crit damage, and I know that a lot of people can get higher than that right now. That really shows that they're trying to rein in, I think, a lot of what we're seeing right now with these high damage builds, just millions and millions of DPS or whatever. I don't even know what the high-end DPS is anymore. I'm fairly certain you can get more than 250% crit hit damage. Just thinking about putting in emerald gems and whatnot. I have to confess, I haven't really looked at how high those numbers go, because I was never really concerned with hitting those high numbers. I was very much self-found, so I didn't put a lot of effort into looking those up. But it looks like they're trying to rein in on that now. So 250% additional damage, 40% chance to crit. So with the additional stats in Paragon, that means the highest you will ever get your critical chance, if assuming that the item cap counts for gems and all that, and we're not talking about skills, it looks like you'll get a maximum of 50% crit chance. Maximum of 300% critical hit damage. Alright, movement speed, looks like that caps out at 25%. So with the adventure stat, which gives 25%, will that go higher? I mean, that's the question, right? I'm assuming that the 50% critical hit chance means you're going to get 40% from gear, 10% from your Paragon levels. I don't see why they would take that away from you unless they're planning on these Paragon levels letting you unlock different gear. kind of like the Magic and Gold find, really. The whole point of Paragon with Magic and Gold find was to make it so that you didn't have to find Magic and Gold find on gear anymore, right? So is these stats that they are putting into Paragon levels, is that going to make it so you don't have to have the gear for it anymore because they're going to cap it? Now keep in mind, this is not final by any means. This is data mined information on a super early build of Reaper of Souls. It could change at any moment. These caps may not even exist, but it's nice to see that they're looking into the idea. Because what's going to happen there is it's going to take some of the builds that are out right now, when Reaper of Souls comes out, and it's going to make things interesting. Because if these numbers, if I'm assuming right, and these numbers are lower than what's out there already on some of the highest DPS characters right now, you're going to be in for a bit of a shock with your damage changes. Also keep in mind you've got 10 levels to make up of items, so there's going to be that whole mad dash for new gear. Really interesting. I'm not entirely sure how this is going to play out. Now, there is a possibility from some data mined information that I found that maximum resources might be included on some of these Paragon levels. Whether or not that'll be an adventure or offense or defense, I don't know. It's possible. Again, I don't have a lot of that information. This is all speculation. A lot of it is data mined. Most of the hard information, such as there being stats, taking away the innate bonuses, those are all been confirmed. But as far as the nitty-gritty, the details on what exactly is happening here, we don't have all that. So let's go ahead and talk about how this is exactly going to work. You're going to have your points distributed per character. So you have your Paragon level. That's account-wide. Great. But if I put a point into strength, that doesn't go to all my characters. It will go per each individual character. The overall level will be for all characters, but the points you distribute will be for the individual character. So if I have a Witch Doctor and I have a Barbarian, right? Let's say I have 10 Paragon levels and I have my Witch Doctor, I have my Barbarian. I take my Witch Doctor and I'm like, I'm going to bump my intelligence because that's what Witch Doctors do. Those points I spend on my intelligence are only for that Witch Doctor. I have 10 Paragon points, I pump in 10 intelligence, great. My Witch Doctor now has plus 10 intelligence. If I go over to my Barbarian, I haven't touched him yet, he's going to have 10 unallocated points because I haven't touched him. I can put those points into strength now. So each character individually will have its own pool of points that you can put in based on what your maximum Paragon level is. Now what they're going to do with existing characters is they're going to make it so that all of your points are pooled together. Now, originally it was said that if you had, say, a Paragon 100 and a Paragon 50, you would then be Paragon level 150. They've gone back on that, and they've said, no, we're sorry. That's going to be experience-based. So they're going to take your Paragon level 100, take the experience of that character, roll it into a general experience bar, take the Paragon 50 you have, take the experience it took to get there, and throw that into the bar as well. So you would end up coming out somewhere under 150. But you should still be over 100. So basically that whole 1 to 100, it looks like is going to be the same. And then everything above that will depend on how much experience it took you. So if you are one of those people that went out and got 5 Paragon 100s, you're not going to be Paragon level 500. But you're going to be pretty damn high up there when all this comes together. Now keep in mind that these points that you put in towards your character, even though they are for individual characters, they can also be respec. So let's say you put your adventure points in a certain set of skills and you decided that's not what you want to do. You can respec these skills. And unfortunately, right now there is no known way, no known cost associated with that. They don't know what they're going to do with that yet. They said they are going to let you respec. They just don't know exactly how. If it's going to be a gold sync, if it's going to be through items, materials, we don't know. Alright, so they've also announced that the hardcore characters, since they have their own separate Paragon level, they will not remove your Paragon levels if a hardcore character dies. Okay? So you get to Paragon 50 with your hardcore character. He dies, you've still got Paragon level 50 on your hardcore characters. So that's important, that they don't want to take those away from you once you've earned them. And so you can start using those points for new hardcore characters that you make. Now, there's still discussion right now as to what's going to happen with currently dead characters. Alright, so we already know that our current Paragon characters are going to roll up their experience into the global Paragon levels. But we don't know what's going to happen with current hardcore characters, especially ones that are already dead. Current hardcore characters should all roll together just fine. It's the death part that they're just not sure of. I would be surprised if they didn't take that into account. I think they just have to make sure that everything, when they put the code in, they add everything together, that it doesn't have any hitches. So that's probably why they're not guaranteeing it right now, is they're afraid of bugs that might prevent it from happening. Blizzard is very cautious about this kind of thing. They don't want to make any kind of announcements when they're not sure if there's going to be a problem. So keep that in mind. Even though they're saying right now we're not sure, the truth of the matter is they probably want to do it. They just want to make sure they can do it. Now, going back to these current characters, keep in mind that when you get to Paragon level 100 right now in Diablo Paragon 1.0, your experience stops accruing. So if you have a Paragon 100 character and you are still playing it, any additional experience that you get beyond level 100 will not count, because the game does not tally it. The only way to get additional Paragon experience if you have Paragon 100 is to get another character up into the Paragon levels. Alright, so all that information is great. And beyond that, a little tidbit of information came out that I'm really surprised didn't become bigger news, considering that a lot of people have been asking for this. But in the Blizzard forums, I've only found one instance of this so far, and this was from Travis Day. People were talking about ladders, and association with Paragon levels seemed to come into play there. And Travis Day came by and posted something to the effect of, when a season ends, all of the Paragon experience you have earned will be rolled into the appropriate pool of Paragon experience for the account, and you will be able to start at 0 again in the new season. This is all still a work in progress and subject to change, but that is what we are currently intending. Without any fanfare, without any major announcements, Travis Day pretty much all but confirms that ladders are going to be in Diablo 3 for Reaper of Souls. Now, this might not seem to be news, except for you have to consider that any information we've had on ladders has been data mined from the PTR clients. And 9 times out of 10, Blizzard will tell you that that information is subject to change wildly. I mean, anything you find in there, and it has been proven with previous patches, they'll put stuff onto the PTR that never makes it. Or they will do stuff in their development cycle that never makes it. You can watch and see them change things like crazy. In previous patches, there have been strings regarding PvP, regarding all sorts of different things that just never came to pass. They were experimenting with it, they were thinking about it, they put these text strings into the Diablo client, and nothing ever became of them. They might come up later, but this was one of those things. Ladders were nothing but text strings in the current PTR client. It's not implemented at all, it's just there as kind of text for the user interface should it ever get implemented, which means it's not even anywhere near a functional state. And yet, with all of that said, people were like, hey, look, there's ladder information, great. Now, then Travis Day confirms it. Still, no fanfare. I'm honestly shocked that that didn't get bigger news or didn't get played up more. It's interesting. And so what he's saying there, basically, is to kind of cover exactly what he's saying. So let's assume that ladders do happen. Let's assume that ladders happen with this new Paragon 2.0 system. You start a character with a new season with no Paragon level. So basically, everybody starts on equal footing. Let's say you get to Paragon 25 during this ladder season. Okay, great. The ladder season's about to end. So what happens? Do you lose all that Paragon experience? No. Let's assume that prior to this ladder, you had a Paragon level 100. You are Paragon level 100. The ladder, you just gained up to Paragon 25. So they will take that 25 that you got and roll it into the global experience again. So you're not 125, you're somewhere below it. You could be 115 maybe. But now you have the global Paragon 115. Your character that was on that ladder will go down to the non-ladder. He gets the benefit of the 115. And the new ladder that starts you off at 0 again. So you're not going to lose that Paragon experience. You're going to go ahead and get to keep it when they start ladders. It's nice to see that they're thinking about it, but again, I'm just kind of surprised. They've said multiple times in interviews that we're thinking about ladders. We're thinking about it. And not once have they ever talked about the mechanics of how those ladders would really work. They've intentionally avoided talking about ladders. So to me, I really never really cared about ladders, but I find this to be just blows my mind that it just kind of didn't really get much more fanfare from the people that have been clamoring for ladders all this time. So I'm going to admit that even though I never cared about the ladders before, I understand why people wanted it. And I've seen how ladders done well can really work. I'm really afraid that they're going to put ladders into Diablo 3 and just do it for the sake of doing it because people have been asking for it. I'm afraid they're not going to take what made ladders work and put it into Diablo 3 and why people want ladders. So let's talk about the way ladders worked in Diablo 2. One of the big things about ladders in Diablo 2 is that you had ladder-specific items. Items that you could not get unless you were in a current season of that ladder. So if you had a character that wasn't a ladder character, there were rune words you couldn't use, there were items you couldn't find, nothing. So people liked having the ladder because then you could find these really cool items, and you got to keep them after the ladder season, but you couldn't find them again afterwards. Let's look at another ladder system done really well. I'm going to talk a little bit about Path of Exile. This is the game that really changed my mind on how ladders could work, and what really made me understand why so many people wanted ladders. Path of Exile has all these really cool different ladders. They have not only the standard, but they have the hardcore, and they of course do their leagues, but they also have specific ladders that are challenge modes. So there's like one ladder I believe they implemented recently. Please forgive me, I haven't played Path of Exile in quite a while. There's several patches I'm behind on. But I've seen some of their ladders, such as this kind of Exile League, where you can randomly run into a computer-generated exile, kind of like your main character, with their own skills, abilities, and all that wonderful stuff. And supposedly killing them would grant you these really cool rewards and gear. But it's a random challenge, a random thing that's thrown into the world at you. There are other leagues that have different hardcore challenges on them. They do occasionally these races where players can jump into other people's games and do hostile PvP and things like that. I look at that system and I'm like, that is amazing. That is replay value right there, because they keep coming up with these different ladder ideas and they can implement them very easily. They basically take the current game they've got, throw in some kind of new random element, and have people go at it. So Diablo 3, we're talking about ladders. But the only thing we've talked about with ladders in Diablo 3 is Paragon. There's been nothing to talk about adding new types of game modes or even ladder-specific items. So I'm a little afraid that these ladders may become nothing more than fluff to say, hey, you can start a new character now and race to become the highest Paragon level compared to everyone else, which might get some people going, but that's not exactly what makes a ladder and makes that ladder tick. Now, there are some game modes in Reaper of Souls that we don't know much about, things like Devil's Hand, or is it Dead Man's Hand? Adventure mode, bounties, and things like that. Those could possibly tie into ladders. We don't really know yet. Again, not enough information, and I haven't really been able to pour over a lot of that. I'll be talking about that once I'm able to get into a lot of the information about Reaper of Souls. But that's the news as far as it goes to Paragon. Again, a lot of interesting stuff there. I kind of like the fact that you can upgrade lower level characters with it, but it's one of those things where you're not going to get a lot out of it, especially if you don't have a high amount of Paragon. If you're just kind of casual like me, like I think I've got level 12 Paragon. That's about as high as I got before I stopped, and that's not going to give me a bit. That's not going to give me very much at all. It's going to give me a few little stats of 0.5% health or 0.2% crit. But again, I don't think they could have made that any higher without making it completely unbalanced and trivializing the game for your lower level characters and things like that. I mean, after all, if they were too high, and we're talking about hardcore characters, for example, those hardcore characters pretty much, where's the challenge, right? I mean, it's going to be so much easier if the stats were too high. So let's bring this into something that has been kind of a peeve of mine when it comes to action RPGs, and that's the allocation of stat points. Things like strength, stamina, vital dex, whatever. Something that's bugged me about those, and when Diablo 3 first came out, one of the big complaints from Diablo 2 to Diablo 3 was there weren't these stat points, and of course there was also skill trees, which I'll get into as well. A lot of people were unhappy that they couldn't customize their character with these stat points. I honestly was very happy to see that go away. Alright, I'm going to put that out there. Okay, it's my opinion, you're open to disagree to that, but I have a reason for it, and that was in Diablo 2, you very well could screw up your character with those stat points. Once people found out the formulas, it pretty much turned out that there was really only one or two ways to build a character in Diablo 2 anyway. Certain pieces of gear needed certain types of stats, a certain amount of strength, a certain amount of dex, in order to wear that gear. Once you knew what the cap was to wear any piece of gear that you wanted, all you had to do was put your points into a set amount of strength, a set amount of dex, or whatever, and then pump pretty much your vitality, so that you had lots of health to survive the high end. If you didn't know that, you could end up completely messing yourself up. Alright, Diablo 2 also had things like mischance and things like that that just made it very difficult that if you didn't pump up the right stats anyway, you very well could be screwed. There are some games that do it fairly well. Diablo 3 is not one of them. Alright, so we're going to have stat points now to put in through these Paragon levels. But what is the optimal way to put in stats in Diablo 3? The optimal way to put your points into is your damage stat. If you're a barbarian or a crusader, you're going to put your points into strength. If you're a wizard or a witch doctor, you're going to put your points into intelligence. If you're a demon hunter, you put it into dex. You know, it's... the points are very specifically going into your damage. Now, with the way they're doing some of these changes to difficulty in Reaper of Souls, you may very well want more vitality. But as it stands right now, what everybody really goes for when it comes to gear is their primary stat. If you're not a strength user, strength you don't go for. Sure, strength increases your armor, which increases your survivability, but this is by no means required, especially since most characters that are not strength users are considered glass cannons, or at least a lot of people are building towards glass cannons. So a lot of people like to say that not having these stat points equates to having a lack of choice. They like to say that about the skill trees in Diablo 3 as well. And I honestly submit to you that I really believe that this choice that was had through these stat points was really just an illusion. There really wasn't too much you could do one way or the other with those points. Alright? And I'm going to bring that right into the skill trees discussion. I've said before I don't like skill trees. Okay? I've said it before, and that's a bit of... that's not entirely true. I dislike most skill trees. And for kind of the same reasons why I dislike stat points. Now, let's just say that some games have done stat points in an interesting way that worked out fairly well, I think. I'll bring up some other action RPGs into this to show that. I believe, for example, Torchlight 2. When I looked into that, I kind of liked what they did with the stats there, because the stats were broken down into what they did for you, very well explained, and what you would see there is exactly what kind of stats you wanted. And some stats were useful for more than one thing. So, for example, Focus. In that game, Focus increases your magic. But it also would have some side effects to other characters that didn't use magic. You would have some stats that would let you dual wield better, but it wasn't only about that. Strength helped you with your raw damage, but they also had other side effects. There were different ways that you could build up. So if you knew what you were going to do, say you were going to be a two-handed user, dual wielder, or whatever, you could look at that and see, okay, here are the things that I want to increase or decrease. And what Torchlight 2 did to get around the whole gear thing, because, again, Diablo 2 had that problem where if you didn't have the right stats, then you couldn't use some of your best gear. And it kind of forced you to push your stats maybe in a direction you didn't want. Like maybe you had to push a whole bunch of strength even though you were a magic user because you just didn't have the strength to use your good equipment. Torchlight 2 fixes that by making items not only have stat requirements, but level requirements. So if you didn't meet the stat requirement, you could still wear the gear as long as you eventually met the level requirement. So Torchlight 2 did an excellent job of getting around that system. The other is Path of Exile. The allocation of points in that game were directly tied into the skill tree. So that one is a bit more unique in that you have to kind of think, they did the gear thing too, so I kind of have a love-hate with the Path of Exile and the way they did things, because you really do have to plan out in advance how you want to do things. But Path of Exile was very deliberately designed around that. So moving that into skill trees. Diablo 2, my problem with Diablo 2 skill trees is you had to put points into substandard skills in order to move on. And if you wanted to use a certain skill that was higher up on the tree, or earlier in the tree, you would eventually find that that skill wasn't really as cool as you really wanted it to. Some of the skills later on would be better. But sometimes the opposite would be true. Some of the earlier skills would be really good, but it took trial and error. And Diablo 2's fault on that was that you couldn't ever reset those, so the only way to reset was through rerolling a character, which worked for some people. But I want to specifically, I'm going to go ahead and read about this interview that happened here. This was apparently streamed on Twitch. This was a interview with Wyatt Cheng and Travis Day with Archon the Wizard. And this quote is specifically from Travis Day. So the question posed, or the statement posed to him was, we went back and played D2 on this stream a few months ago. And I forgot how much I love the skill trees. I know the skill tree isn't what you guys were thinking of, but yeah, you get a little more sense of ownership and pride in your character. To which Travis would come by and say, for sure. That's more to do with the fact that you customize your guy. I think that's the important part. When people talk about the skill system, it was fun. It was also full of black holes and traps for players to make. I remember my first Necro in D2. Back then, we didn't have the internet like you kids today. We had it, but there were no forums where people had intelligent conversations or useful wiki pages. It was kind of like the Wild Wild West, where you say, I don't know, I'm going to make a character. What's he going to be? Whatever I click on, that's what he's going to be. I remember I played the game that way, and I had a lot of fun for a while. I had my army of skeleton mages, and then my skeletons are going to tank for my skeleton mages, and I was like, this is amazing. It worked pretty well. And then I got to Nightmare, and it wasn't working so well. And then I got to Hell, and every skeleton I ever summoned would die in one hit. And I had to kill a monster to even summon one of my skeletons. I was like, this is the most unplayable character ever. It was miserable. And those are the kind of things people don't really remember about the skill tree. So I've gone on record as saying, I think the old Diablo skill system is outdated. I firmly stand on that. Because people have fond memories of it, but at the same time, there were just as many people who had really bad gameplay experiences. For a lot of gamers in general, if you hit a brick wall, if you're suddenly dying a lot and you can't figure out why, and you're playing a game like D2 where your choices are permanent and you can't change anything about it, your inclination is not, well, I'll re-roll and make a new character and fix it. It's, no, I'm just going to quit your game. I'm done. The game is too hard. This sucks. I quit. So customization is good. Giving players the false choice is bad. I call it the illusion of choice all of the time. Just because you can choose between A and B, if B says do +1 damage, and A says do +1000 damage, all we're letting you do is screw up your character, and that's never good. So again, that all comes from Travis Day, and I fully agree with him. I mean, again, that whole illusion of choice thing. Though there were lots of traps like that, do +1 compared to do 1 +1000, and they were traps that you eventually had to find. Now, some people didn't mind that, having to reroll characters. I know I did it all the time, and I got tons of replay value on Diablo 2, but I'm going to tell you that nowadays, that's not really what I want to go for. I would rather be able to just say, hey, you know, I wonder if it would be cool if I did this, and to go and try and make that happen. But I don't want to spend hours of my time having to get to the point that I can experiment. These skill trees, while their initial idea is a good idea, the way they're implemented just doesn't always work. You know, I look at World of Warcraft, and they had skill trees, and they've been constantly fighting with those skill trees. And finally, with Mist of Pandaria, they said, we're going to just condense these things into a few choices. It used to be you had so many skill points, 50, 60, whatever, and you would put them into all these skills, and most of them amounted to plus 1% damage, plus 1% mitigation. That's not really fun when you're leveling up. I mean, I remember D2 leveling up, I would hold on to points. Like, I had this really cool spell I wanted to get, but I needed to level up 2 skills before it. So I would have to hold on to my skills for a level or 2 before I could go into that, and that's not fun. And if you're not planning it, again, it's one of those things where you just don't see it, you don't realize it's a problem. Doesn't mean that it's not a problem, though. And there have been some skill trees that have done it better since, to show that skill trees can still work. Again, I point to Torchlight 2. I looked at that skill tree and I kind of liked what they did with it. Not only did they take the skills and make it so that you put a point into it and it adds a little bit of damage, which again doesn't seem like a great choice, but what they did is say, hey, if you invest 5 points into this skill, you're going to get this other cool effect. Now, sometimes it was just even more damage, but some of them added things like stuns or roots or burning damage or some other kind of effect. Maybe you would get cluster bombs instead of a regular bomb, you know, something like that. You would get some kind of bonus. But not only that, but all the skills in Torchlight 2 were weapon damage based, just like Diablo 3 did. So they solved the problem of the Diablo 2 skill tree, where in Diablo 2, all of your skills had set damage. They weren't based on your weapon damage at all. So the only way to improve your skills, so if you were a caster, the only thing you could do to improve your skills was to either level up or to find gear with plus the skills on it. There were a few other things, I believe, that you could also pick up, but those were the primary ways. You couldn't find a better weapon. You know, you couldn't just say, hey, I've got this arcane staff here. This one does even more arcane damage. It's going to enhance my magics. No, it was, well, this one's got +2 to warmth and +1 to teleport. Nah, I don't want that. So not exactly fun. Path of Exile, again, another one of those, kind of the odd man out, but I really respect them for what they've done. They've made this system where you really can think and plan out builds, and they have so many legendary items, which is, again, one of Diablo 3's failings at the moment, but, you know, I'm looking forward to some of the new loot, but they've got some really interesting skill trees in Path of Exile that I can't hate on it, just because I know it's a very deliberate path that they're taking. They want to be that old school kind of, you have to think about it. But even Path of Exile has ways to respec your character and go back a little bit. You can get these orbs that will allow you to reset some of your points. So even they know that locking you into bad decisions is not a good idea. Skill trees can work, but the thing about Diablo 3 that I like was you didn't have to worry about the points anymore because you were given the skills over time, and every time you leveled it was a new skill. Every time you leveled it was either a new skill, a new rune, or a passive. Whereas in Diablo 2, when you leveled it was, oh boy, here's a point, am I spending it this level? Well, if you are, then it's like, oh boy, my fireball does, instead of 2 to 3 damage, it does 3 to 6 damage. Yay. So there was stuff to look forward to on those skill trees. Or at least in the skill progression of Diablo. And I've heard some people talk about it, you know, going through making new characters on the ladder. Some people are a bit disappointed because, well, you're going to have the same skill progression. You're always going to learn the same skills in the same order. Well, when you think about it, the same was kind of true for Diablo 2. If you wanted to build a particular build, you had to pick your skills in the same order. Right? You had to go down the tree. Some skills were prerequisites for other skills. And if you specifically wanted to buff one skill, and you're dealing with the 110 patch, or the 210, whichever it was, the one where they added synergies in Diablo 2, then you had to specifically pump up specific skills as you got them. So people want to talk about this choice about when to get your skills in Diablo 3 compared to Diablo 2, but again, I think that was an illusion. Because you still could not pick up Frozen Orb at level 1. Right? So a lot of people like to look at that with rose-tinted glasses. I went back and played Diablo 2 just before playing Diablo 3. I had already played a Diablo 3 beta. Diablo 3 beta had closed down. It was getting ready to release, and I went out and I played Diablo 2 with a bunch of other guys, including Travis from SC2 Noob School. And I went back to that and I was like, wow, there's so many things here I forgot about how bad some of this stuff was compared to D3. You know, the different stats you had to maintain, and the fact that the difficulty really wasn't skill-based. It was really more about having the right stats to survive and hoping the RNG favored you. For example, missing monsters and whatnot. You pretty much stood there beating down monsters and spamming potions. And I think Diablo 3 is leaps and bounds beyond that. And I think that's a good segue to go into the last subject. Let's go into the final subject here, because this is something that came out. This was yesterday, I believe, on the 25th, and this is from Wyatt Cheng. This is on the negative effects of the inconsistent health pools, and I think this is a very important discussion and something I really hope that they're taking to heart, and I think they'll do wonders if they can get this to work right for Reaper of Souls. So let me go ahead and I'm going to read off this discussion that he had. He says, let's talk about combat. From a big picture standpoint, it is not healthy for the game when a player's health pool goes from full to nearly empty and back to full on a regular basis very quickly, over and over during regular play. I know not every character builds this way, but I would assert that it's not good for the game when this is a dominant or even common way to play. Why? Well, here are a few negative effects. 1. The health pool that quickly goes from full to nearly empty implies that there's not a lot of room for variance in incoming damage. When incoming damage is that high, a 15% increase in monster damage will result in death. This leads to comments like, as soon as I turn up the monster power, I get one shot. I'd like to see a game where a clever player can handle a higher monster power by reducing incoming damage through good play. Unfortunately, if the combat pacing and dominant builds are such that all players are geared to survive the biggest possible hit from a monster and instantly heal to full, then there's no room for that differentiation. Let's use Mortar as a simple example. If a wave of Mortar hits takes me from full to nearly dead, and then I instantly heal back to full, then Mortars don't pose a realistic threat to me. In this state, there is no way for a clever player who wants to dodge mortars to differentiate themselves from somebody who doesn't care and just decides to get hit. In both cases, you're healing instantly to full and surviving the damage no matter what, and in both cases, turning up the monster power results in you dying no matter what. If you take a single mortar wave, it becomes a pure gear check. I think that's very important. I think this, taking a pause there before going into number 2, I think that is very important because that is really the crux of the matter of what happened to Inferno when it first came out. People were going into Inferno and finding this massive wall of difficulty when Diablo 3 first came out. If you managed to get through Act 1 Inferno and you got into Act 2, what was there waiting to greet you? Bees. Have I ever mentioned my disgust for these bees? I believe I have. If you haven't seen my disgust for these bees, don't worry, there's plenty of videos out there in Diablo 3 where I discuss hating the matter of being covered in bees. These bees could one-shot you, and they fired 3 shots at a time, quickly, while you're fighting all sorts of other monsters. Act 2 was the biggest pain in the ass, next to going into Act 3 and then Act 4, I suppose. But that was a big problem. Death. Instant death. What could you do about it? Alright, so going on to number 2. For players who push the monster power up anyways, it makes the game feel like it was designed around one-shots. In my previous example with Mortar, some of you may be thinking, there's room for turning up the monster power, just don't get hit at all. Well, this isn't great either. It means that my death feels very binary. One moment I'm at full health, the next instant I'm dead. It means that once you decide you're going to accept being one-shot, you don't care about your health at all. Who cares if you have 20k, 40k health when you're going to die either way? We'd be in a better place if the Mortar Dodger was allowed to take the occasional hit, but can handle a higher monster power as long as a majority of them are dodged. Again, another good point. This is where all the glass cannons come into play. A lot of people go in knowing that they're going to get one shot no matter what their health is. So they neglect their vitality. Now there are some people that don't do that. They'll go in, they'll build vitality no matter what their character is, maybe a little bit defense, resist all, and they will survive. But it really brings into this whole... I think he's going to talk about this a bit more, about leeching life and how gameplay is. Let me go into a few more of his points before I talk about that, and see if there's a better point to talk about that. So number 3, healing very rapidly back to full also loses all the fidelity of small attacks. If players are regularly going from full to nearly empty and back to full again on a regular basis, then there's no room for mechanics which act as a slow drain on your health. Plagued is a great example of this. We don't want Plague to be something that kills you quickly, but it shouldn't be something that you ignore forever. Standing in a pool of poison should be something that adds tension to the fight. You know you're not going to die now, but you can see the threat looming. When healing rates are very high, there's no room for the slow drain of damage sources. They become insignificant. Number 4, my current health loses meaning. Being at 95% health should mean you're relatively safe. Being at 5% health should mean you're almost dead. Being at 50% should mean you're somewhat in danger, and you should play it safe. But as long as you do, you should be fine. These are all concepts that make intuitive sense. Unfortunately, they are not all true in the current Diablo environment. When health pools are rapidly going from empty to full back again, these health values all blur together. Number 5, you lose a lot of tactical combat opportunities. Tactical combat requires that the player can properly assess the situation and react accordingly. When your health pool moves up and down rapidly, you are no longer reacting to dangers. A rapidly changing health globe means you are playing in a predictable pattern and crossing your fingers hoping that you live through it. You are playing in a way that avoids situations that will instantly kill you, but there's no tension associated with being low on health that would cause you to make tactical decision to change your play pattern. I'm saying all of this without pointing at any specific solutions. That's because there are no instant fix solutions. It is a challenging problem that we're actively working on. Things aren't going to be perfect overnight, but improving the pacing of combat is something we constantly work on. I will say that the first line of defense is reducing the rate at which players heal. After we pull in the rate of healing, next we analyze the patterns in which monsters deal damage. Ultimately, defensive stats will play a role in all of this. If some life regeneration, damage mitigation, or gasp, life on hit lets me play a little more aggressively, that's a good thing. So all of that, I really like the way he's put that, because there's been plenty of arguments regarding this as well, that it's all very true. I mean, really, you're going from full to empty. I think of like my Barbarian, for example. Now, I'm not a Whirlwind Barbarian. I use my two-handed Merciless Assault build, which I've got an old video that apparently still people look at. I don't know why. Where I like to go through, charge through enemies with Merciless Assault, and I use Rend as a primary source of healing. And it's really the same thing, because what happens is I go in, I fight a bunch of monsters, my health will get low, I rend, my health gets back up to full. I basically charge in, rend up, do a bunch of damage, go out before my rend drops, and then drop it on something else. And my health globe just continually goes down and up, down and up, down and up. You know, you're taking so much damage over time, and you're having to compensate it by all this life drain, that it doesn't really feel tactical. I mean, the only thing you can really do is avoid mortars, avoid, energy beams and things like that. You know, intelligent play of stunning a big monster. You know, if you see a big monster coming at you that's about to give you a big hit and you stun it, or you're able to avoid the hit, you know, all that you're really doing right now is avoiding instant death. You know, for example, the monsters in Act 4, where they've got the 4 arms and they hammer down on you, that's pretty much instant death if they hit you with that. I think that it should be one of those things where if it hits me, I should really feel it and I should be in danger, but not make it instant death. Because then it just makes it so that when I'm in a sea of monsters, and this happens, I've been in a sea of monsters, there have been maybe 4 of those hammer guys, the only thing I can do is keep running. And I have to pick off the little guys before I can finally get to the guys with the hammers and hopefully kill them off one at a time. Because I know at any point that if I get hit by any one of them, I'm dead. And granted, that is still tactical play. I'm having to maneuver a lot. I'm having to pick enemies off one at a time. But it's also very slow and grinding play because there is no middle ground. It's all or nothing. I go in, do a bunch of damage, run, If I get hit, I'm dead. It's just not really fun that way. As much as I enjoy my Merciless Assault build, and I love it far more than a Whirlwind build I tried. You know, Whirlwind builds are great and all, but they are really one of the biggest problems, and showcase one of the biggest problems with the game. Now, I don't begrudge anybody that has a Whirlwind build. You know what? That's great. It's an awesome build. It works well. It works too well. I don't want to see it go away, but it does work too well. You go in there and you're doing constant damage, constant life on hit ticks. What's happening? You're basically running through monsters and your health globe drops and comes back up, but it happens so quickly sometimes you don't even see it. But that's just it. How is that tactical? You're just running through a group of mobs doing a whole bunch of damage. Now, again, I'm not really going to talk too much about Reaper of Souls, but as a whole, but there are some data mine information that shows that they're going to get rid of some of that stuff. For example, the Thrive on Chaos, the increasing the length of your Wrath of the Berserker with crits, or sorry, I believe that was through Fury generated, they're going to kind of take that away. They're going to change Archon as well for Wizards so that it doesn't increase the length of time every second with monster death as well. They're going to bring those back to abilities that should be really cool and really awesome to have when you need them, but they're not going to be permanent fixtures on your bar anymore. They're not going to be, you know, Wrath of the Berserker builds with Thrive on Chaos. You were almost always in that mode. Archon, with the right build, you could almost always be in that mode, especially with Critical Mass. These abilities just... they showed how binary the game tends to get. You're either doing everything or nothing. Everything or nothing. Very binary. And these builds really, when you think about it, showcase that. Because what are you doing but basically becoming this badass killing machine? And the moment that drops, you either need to get back into it immediately or you're going to die. I just don't think that's compelling. I think they're cool builds. Kudos to anybody that created them, that plays them, whatever. You know, that can be fun. You know, I think honestly, being a little overpowered at times can be a little fun. But when it happens a majority of the time, then you have to look into it and think, okay, is there maybe something we can do better? And it looks like they're really willing to take a look at that and change some of these things. So a couple things I've noticed in the data mine information that I will be going over when I get into character changes on a future episode here. But they are taking away a lot of the, not so much life on hits, but the life percentage restored. So for example, Rend, when you put it down, it gives you a percentage of the damage you do back as health. They're going to change that so it gives you either a regeneration effect or it gives you life on hit. So they're taking away the damage-based life regeneration on most skills. I think one or two still have it, but most skills are losing that. And that doesn't mean we're going to lose it on gear, but it's going away on the skills. So they're going to make that much more, hopefully, fluid. There's a lot more regeneration with spending of resources. For example, spending spirit will heal you. They've also doubled a lot of those numbers. So before, if you had a mechanic that you would get healing back based on spirit spend, you'll get more now. There's also a lot more group play mechanics being involved. This is something that I'm very happy to see, because a co-op game like Diablo really needs group mechanics, and I'm seeing things like the mantras for the monks and some of the auras and shouts for barbarians, for example, are getting some more significant boosts to party play. So they're not just going to be as selfish as they were. Now, they weren't always entirely selfish, but they were kind of one-trick ponies. And the truth of the matter is there was always one solution that was better than others. Now it looks like there's going to be better options available to you for whatever kind of gameplay you really want to do. Again, all subject to change. I'm very excited, if you couldn't tell. I'm very excited by some of these options that are going to be available. But I am still keeping a little bit of that salt, a little bit of that grain of salt, still keeping a little bit of cynicism. I want to wait and see. I am excited. I'm very happy to see these changes. But I also know that with all its good intentions, Blizzard can sometimes still mess it up. But they are usually very genuine in trying to fix problems, even if it doesn't always seem like it. even if sometimes they are slow to listen, they eventually get there. At least that's been the experience I've seen. And I know not everyone's going to agree with that. You know, that's perfectly fine. But I think the point here still remains that there are good things in the line. There are very involved decisions being made to make gameplay better. And if they can make these promises happen, I think Reaper of Souls can be very good. I'm looking forward to Loot 2.0. That being said, I think we've spent enough time here. And I want to thank you all again for listening. This time being kind of more of a personal rant on this one. I know not so much news. But that is what this podcast is for, is it not? For discussion. Okay, now, before I wrap it up, I want to thank everybody who came by, who provided feedback and discussion on the previous Diablo Digest, where we talked a lot about the auction house. I got some really good feedback and conversation, not only here in YouTube, but I also posted it on Diablo Fans and on Reddit. I tend to get a little leery about Reddit. They downvote you at random sometimes, especially if it's not new information. So if I post this one on Reddit, it might not do so well. But, again, there was some really good conversation there. And I was really glad to see it happen. And so thanks again to each and every one of you that came by and contributed to the discussion. You guys have been a great audience. So again, thank you from the bottom of my heart. And thank you again for watching this time. I'm hoping to see more discussion on this one. And so until then, ladies and gentlemen, I will see you next time.